How's it going, everybody? I'm Artorigold with LFG, and I have to talk about the Burning Crusade. It is one of my all-time favorite expansions, and with news of BlizzCon 2021 being right around the corner, there have been a handful of leaks and rumors hinting at a TBC Classic announcement. Now, I have been playing a ton of Classic WoW ever since release, and I have met all kinds of different people. A lot of them just want to continue to play Classic instead of TBC, and while I really do understand that, especially since Classic will always remain a timeless masterpiece, I have endless hours of game time during the TBC era, and I can safely say that it is essentially the closest thing to vanilla. It is basically just vanilla plus, or classic plus. TBC doesn't feel at all like any of the other expansions, and it is the closest thing to what vanilla plays like, with the added bonus of a whole lot of new content to play with. So I decided to make this video to give you my personal top 5 reasons why you should play TBC Classic, especially since I have a few friends out there who want to just keep playing Classic, and I kind of want to convince them to play TBC with me. So at number 5, I have Arenas. This is where PvP as we know it began. You get a team together for 2v2 or 3v3, and in TBC you also get 5v5 to try and climb the ranking system and get better gear, titles, and even mounts to show off with. Arenas are one of the best ways to experience PvP, and it's literally the only thing I even enjoy doing whenever I play retail. Classic WoW is so good, but when it comes to PvP, you are really missing out on the arena experience, which I find rather unfortunate. For those of you worried about the balancing in TBC, you also get the addition of Resilience, which is essentially a PvP stat that reduces the damage that you take from critical strikes. If you have played a ton of Classic PvP, you are no stranger to the danger that crits can do. The burst damage is off the charts in Classic, so Resilience helps anybody survive as long as you can get enough of it. Also in TBC is the introduction to diminishing returns, so the power of being chain polymorphed or chain feared is way less effective. Being polymorphed in Classic PvP was especially frustrating. I know the CC gets a hefty nerf. I, for one, absolutely hated being polymorphed in Classic. It's very frustrating. Any Classic player who loves PvP will definitely love Arenas. So if you can take a break from your rank 14 grind to try and hit Gladiator, I promise you will have a ton of fun. Number 4, new abilities. Now, every WoW expansion has always added new spells, talents, and things to try out for every class and spec. However, TBC is where a lot of classic staple abilities began that we all love. Great new additions like Unstable Affliction, Seed of Corruption, Arcane Blast, Water Elementals, Cloak of Shadows, Shadow Step, Mutilate, Bloodlust, and so on, so on, so on. There are so many new abilities added in TBC, and each one further enhances the already powerful classes and specs that were dominant in Classic. However, there are also many new spells for the weaker classes and specs, turning what were once seen as joke specs into valuable and relevant specs that are more than welcome to any dungeon and raid. For example, Elemental Shamans, Boomkin Druids, and Shadow Priests are now way more viable than they ever were in Classic. Boomkins now get extra spell crit bonuses to their party, and Elemental Shamans get a new totem that also gives spell crit, and Shadow Priests get Vampiric Touch, which will restore a ton of mana to everybody in their party. These classes all synergize well together. For example, Boomkin's biggest issue in Classic was how quickly it ran out of mana, and with the new Vampiric Touch, that issue gets solved. Now put in an Elemental Shaman and 2 other casters, and now you have a group with 8% more spell crit and a bunch of extra mana to spend. Now this is only touching the surface, since there are a lot of other specs that received mini buffs, such as Hunter pets gaining avoidance, making their pets take reduced damage from AoE, which is a huge problem in raiding in Classic. While a lot of these classes were seen as giant memes, they are now viable and have their place. The same can also be said about Pallies. Prot Pallies are now the go-to AoE tank and are absolutely god tier in dungeons, and Ret is more active than it ever used to be, making it a much more powerful class. I think everybody who plays WoW wants to min-max to some degree, and in Classic, a lot of people try to make the off-meta stuff work. While all of it was inefficient, they all still have a place, but they were just not seen very often. So if you really enjoy any of these specs, or maybe you just really like playing the underdog, you can try out all of these in TBC. It's always a bit of fun whenever you can beat somebody as an off-meta spec, and in TBC, that is way more achievable. Number 3 is 25 and 10-man raids. Now, I love 40-man raids as much as anybody. With a bunch of players all gathered up to fight huge raid bosses is a crazy feeling. However, there are a lot of benefits to 25-man raids. First off, it's pretty difficult to get 40 people online consistently. A lot of people don't show up, or plans change at the last second, and they can't make it. Sometimes you have people disconnect, lag out, or perhaps even their power will go out during the middle of the raid and they just never make it back. So the end result is that you have to try and kill Cthulhu while missing like 6 or 7 people, maybe even more. These sort of things are inevitable, and it will continue to happen no matter what the raid size is. However, it's much easier to find replacements for 1 or 2 people who are MIA rather than looking for 6 or 7. Another big reason the smaller raid size can be great is that you have way less people to compete with for all of the loot. Sometimes you are just super unlucky in that raid and you really have to wait your turn for specific items. Having less people, this won't be much of an issue. So if you're impatient on getting loot, then TBC raiding will be much better for you. With less raid sizes, there will also be more guild options per server. I know when I first started out in Classic, I actually tried to make my own guild. However, I could only get a handful of raiders and I was nowhere near having 40 people. Needless to say, it's much easier to start a guild based off doing 10-man Karazhan runs and then eventually move onto the 25-mans than it is trying to start a guild from scratch in order to do 40-man Molten Cores. Trust me, I know from experience. Number 2, less consumables. One of the better things financially about TBC is you don't need as many consumables for raiding. Now, I know I can't speak for everybody here, but I had to spend so much time and money on consumables as a warlock. Once AQ40 came out, with it a boss called the Twin Emperors was in there, and you had to have a warlock to tank the boss. As one of the warlock tanks for my guild, I had to really go out of my way to make sure I had every bit of shadow resistance and extra health that I could get, which meant I spent a lot of time farming for consumables and gear just in order to tank one boss. I had to make sure to get my Gift of Arthas, greater and regular shadow protection potions, Elixir of Firepower to help my Searing Pains get more threat, Brilliant Wizard Oil, Spirit of Zanza, Dirge's Chops, and a flask if I was feeling extra ambitious. I had to make sure to get a bunch of these every week just in case we would wipe, so I would then have to consume them all over again. As you can imagine, this was ruining me financially, keeping me perpetually broke throughout Phase 5 and 6. Now that was me experiencing only a fraction of what tanks out there had to go through every single raid. I didn't quite realize just how much gold and time went into getting all of these things until I had to do it all myself. Yeah, it's a lot of work and a lot of extra grinding, and I'm happy to say that in TBC, you don't have to do all of that anymore. In the Burning Crusade, the only consumables you need are a food buff, a weapon oil, and 1 flask. You do have the option of, instead of using a flask, you could use 1 battle elixir and 1 guardian elixir instead. This will make sure that if you want to parse and compete for top DPS, you don't have to bend over backwards to maintain all of the different consumables that you need. It will also free up a ton of your bag space, which is really helpful for me considering how many damn soul shards I have to use to summon all of you lazy fucks. And here is my number 1, no more world buffs. Now, if you're anything like me, you rather enjoyed getting all those juicy world buffs at the beginning of Classic. However, as the game went on, more world buffs came out, such as the Dark Moon Fortunes, Dire Maul buffs, and then of course the ZG buffs. Now, I had no problem getting all of these. I did it twice a week just to show off how big my dick was with massive DPS and parses that would knock your balls off. However, after raiding with them week after week, it really just felt like everything was on easy mode. Back in original vanilla, I don't remember anybody going to the extremes that we see today. Nobody got all of these world buffs and made sure to log off whenever possible to min-max and save a few seconds here or a minute there on all of the buffs. it just wasn't a thing. And while I do appreciate min-maxing, all of these world buffs made the raids way too easy. I remember vanilla being way more difficult, and there are a lot of reasons why. It was the early age of the internet, and information wasn't as accessible. At the end of the day, it feels like the only real difficulty that I had with raiding was a Nax. I mean, sure, anybody could say, this is old content, of course it will be easy. Well, without every single guild getting world buffs, I wonder how easy it would remain for everyone. Another issue I had with getting all of these world buffs is that I wasn't able to play my main as much as I wanted. I would go ahead and get done with raiding and take the mage portal back to Org. Shortly after, I would see that somebody was dropping a Nixia or Rend soon. So of course, I would make sure to get those buffs early. I mean, why not? I'm already here, so I should save myself some time and get the buffs now while I can. Well, by doing so, that now means I have to log off my main, and I can now only play on him just to go and get the other buffs. If I stay on him too long, then obviously I will waste away some of my time on these precious buffs. So instead of doing things that I would love to be doing on my main, such as PvP or being out in the world doing whatever, I instead will not be able to do anything on him until it's raid time. This was something that I disliked. I wanted to play on my main as much as possible, but getting all of the world buffs was just such a requirement that it meant that I had to spend more time on my ults instead of on my main. While yes, world buffs are super cool, and I especially loved them early on in Phase 1, as they were just a simple, easy boost for everyone to get, it turned into more of a requirement, or else you would get in trouble with your guild, which, you know, that isn't ever any fun. And even if your guild didn't require for you to get world buffs, and you show up with nothing, you will still most likely suffer. Without any world buffs, your DPS is now on the low end of things, because there is a pretty good chance that even though it's not required, other people did get the buffs. So now you have low DPS. What reason does the almighty loot council have to give you any of that epic loot? They will probably give the loot to the players who deserve it and go the extra mile instead. So in the end, I would rather be a part of getting the world buffs twice a week in order to help my chances of getting loot rather than just missing out and getting nothing. One last thing I would also like to mention here is that on top of all of that, there also grew a new form of fuckery from all of the world buff meta. And of course, I am talking about dispels. I can't begin to tell you how annoying it was to go out of your way to get all of those world buffs just to have some asshole priest come along and make all of that effort disappear in a second. On my server, there were all sorts of random level 60 priests who would die in the middle of Org just to respawn occasionally to dispel as much as they could. They would hide near the mailbox, the auction house, and even where the portal exit was. It was really annoying to try and avoid them, and it just added another extra reason to why your character needed to be logged off and hidden somewhere at all times in order to avoid it. Well, at the end of the day, if TBC Classic comes out, we don't have to worry about all of those issues anymore, and I am very thankful for it. I enjoy world buffs as a small little boost here and there, especially if I'm leveling ults. But like I've said before, if you give the tools to the community, they will find a way to abuse it. Now, with all of that being said, I think TBC Classic will be amazing, and every Classic player will enjoy it. TBC is essentially just Classic Plus. It still feels and plays like Classic with some extra features, and it gets rid of some annoying grinds. Now that I'm older, you know, I'm just an old chunk of coal, I don't really have as much free time as I used to. So getting rid of a lot of the time-consuming grinds and farming will be better for me, since there is no way I can compete with all of the streamers or no-lifers who have all day to play the game. So while I would love to see Blizzard make some new, fresh Classic servers that I would love to play on, I think for now, I'm most excited to play TBC Classic instead. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check me out at twitch.tv/Artorigold. I go live every Tuesday through Saturday around 6 p.m. PST.